right, good morning, campers. Good morning, campers. All right, welcome to Constitution 101. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Mr. Hal Shurtleff, Director of Camp Constitution and co-founder. Okay. All right. Before I get into it, I want to mention Miss Debbie Bacigalupi is in the area, and she is giving an optional class, which will, let's say 2 o'clock?
2 o'clock.
On nutrition, and, no, not nutrition, I'm sorry, on...
No, vegan.
You are not a vegan.
You are not a vegan.
Period.
All right? So,
Period. Exclamation point.
and you know what? I think we'll maybe even give some camp bucks to those who participate, the campers. So we're bribing you to attend. No, not really. Mrs. Harper, who is our program director, told me that the results of the entrance exam were the best she's ever seen. And I'm going to acknowledge just the top few. Gabriel Jimenez, 105. So you can go home now if you like. Or you can just sort of hang out for the week. You don't have to, you can't learn anything else. Andrew Affleck, 95. Alex Pike, 95. Stephen Mauder, 95. Caitlin Affleck, 90. And then, so those were the tops. Just give them a nice hand. I think that's outstanding. All right, let me ask you something here. How many of you have been here before? And you all got constitutions? How many of you actually look at them during the course of the year? Put your hands up. No, I want to see them. All right. Now, about 10 years ago, I was invited to speak at the Keene State College. They had a presentation called Got Rights. It was Constitution Day, September 17th. And it was very interesting that during the Reagan administration, they passed a law that says that any school that gets money from the federal government has to have a Constitution Day event. That sound good? We all think that's a good law? How many? Really? If a federal government is giving money to a state college, they have to have Constitution Day? What's wrong with that picture? It's unconstitutional. Can you imagine the people say, wait a minute, we now learn about the Constitution. This law is I mean, we benefited from it because I was invited to speak, but it's an unconstitutional law. Right? Where does it say that the federal government gives money to state colleges? Is it in there? Then why do we do it? Because not enough people know about this precious Constitution. Last year, it was early June, my daughter Christina, Miss Shurtleff, she was enrolled in Liberty University, so they had all-day orientation. It was a long day, but I like to catch a minor league baseball game every so often, and it just so happens that Lynchburg has a minor league baseball team. So I checked it out, and there was a young lady passing out her campaign brochure. She was running for Congress. So I thought I'd have a little fun, and I asked this nice young lady, where do you find the job description for a member of Congress? And she looked at me like I had two heads. She had no clue what I was talking about. So I rephrased the question. I said, where do you find the where do you find the duties and responsibilities and other things that when you get elected, things that you have to do? And she said, online? Well, yes, but can you be more specific? The Constitution is online. You know, I asked my oldest daughter when she was a toddler, she's now 34, 35. I says, where does milk come from? Now we're in the kitchen. She looked at me like I was pretty dumb. She says, from the refrigerator. Now that is true, but that's not the ultimate. So I took her to a farm where she actually milked a cow. I said, this is where the milk comes from, right? So anyway, so I always carry constitutions with me or nearby, and I brought her a constitution, this lady running for office, and I said, you know, if you understand this Constitution, you will be so far ahead of your opponents and most likely the incumbent. And then I looked at her campaign brochure and I said she would be one of I call it the gang of four. She would be a member of the squad if she got elected. She's a far leftist. But she had no idea what the Constitution was about. Now all of you have a little 10-question quiz. We're going to review it. And if you scored an 80 or above, I tell people when they come to our information table, I said, if you score 80 or above, I have to take a picture of it and turn it into the FBI because you are totally unqualified to hold any office in this country because you know too much about the U.S. Constitution. And I say that kiddingly, but I would say that most elected officials couldn't get this right. Now, we do year-round activities. We speak at homeschool events. We have information at homeschool shows. We had a table in Boston Common just a few weeks ago. And we have copies of the Constitution. We have this little 10-question quiz and some other information. And I tell you something, if someone when someone teaches me something, I appreciate that. Doesn't matter left, right, moderate, whatever they are, I appreciate that. And we are very well received. But it's amazing how little people know about the Constitution. I was at the Red Pill Expo, where there's a lot of well-informed people, and most people did terrible on it. Most people were even afraid to take the test. So there's a lot of people who are experts on certain things in the freedom movement. That doesn't mean they know a whole lot about the Constitution. Now, you remember when President Trump wanted to declare a national emergency to secure the border, right? Is that a good idea? Who thinks that was a good idea? Okay. Does the term national emergency appear in the U.S. Constitution?
Protection from invasion.
No, I'm getting that. I'm getting there. You're right. He has an obligation. But he didn't need to declare a national emergency. He has an obligation to protect us. That's true. That's constitutional. National emergencies were a recent, last 100 years. And just because other presidents have done it doesn't make it right. So he was completely right in saying that we can protect the states from invasion, which is in the Constitution. But he didn't call me. He didn't ask me for my advice. I tried to get a hold of him, you know. But I'm glad that they are interested in protecting the borders, but not necessarily through a national emergency. Because, again, it's not in the Constitution. Okay, so I'm going to review this little quiz, and it hopefully will take up most of the 50-minute segment. And what I'm going to do is I want you to raise your hand, okay, and then give me the answer. So, which amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms? All right. Stand up and... Now, it says protects, doesn't it? Does it give us that right? Is there a difference between giving and protecting? So we had that right even if there wasn't a Second Amendment. In fact, the Constitution was... what was the day the Constitution was approved? Not approved by the states, but when the delegates said, okay, this is it, we're now transmitting it to the states. Anybody know? It's in your Constitution. September 17th, 1787. The Bill of Rights weren't passed until 1791. In fact, December 15th is Constitution Day, Bill of Rights Day. So were all the citizens disarmed until that Second Amendment was passed? Did the militia on Concord, Lexington Green say, oh, wait a minute now, we're not supposed to be here because we don't have an amendment that gives us this right? No. The right to protect yourself is what? God-given. That's right. We did. You look a little rough for a young camper. Tough childhood. It's God-given. Okay. So, and by the way, all of your states have constitutions, and some of them predate the U.S. Constitution. The Massachusetts Constitution, for example, is the oldest constitution that is still used, 1780, in the world, not just in our country. And I would say to you, if you looked at, you should get a copy of your state constitution. When you get home, put a call into your state rep. If you already don't have one, your state representative, a state senator, and say, could you please send me a copy of the state's constitution? If you ever visit the State House, you can also most likely get one there. Although I tried to find state constitutions, I was in Texas, and nobody knew anything about where I could find a state constitution. They ran me all over the place. I eventually got one, but not through them. The state constitution of Massachusetts, it says you have the right to protect yourself. Now, how do you protect yourself today? You call 911 and hide under the table? Right?
No, you hide in the closet.
And what's that? Hide in the closet. That's right. Oh, thank you. I'm staying correct. Hide in the closet. Okay. Now, this one isn't a life and death thing, but if you understand the Constitution, you'd have a little understanding about the requirements. There are requirements for office. Not everybody can run. okay? Illegal aliens cannot run for office. Now, that might change in some states, but right now you have to be a U.S. citizen. What is the age requirement of the U.S. Senate?
The age requirement for the U.S. Senate is 30 years.
30 years of, okay, excellent. Okay, now, how many senators do we have? How many? Put your hand up and I'll recognize you. Yes, sir. No, I mean in the country. 100, okay, 2 from each state. Now, another question is, when there's a tie in the Senate, who casts the deciding vote? Yes, ma'am. Stand up. I can't hear you. The Vice President. But why is that? Because no one else wants the job? Because under Article 1 of the Constitution, where it reads about the powers of the Senate, that the Vice President is actually the President of the Senate. Now, years ago, the Vice Presidents used to actually run. They used to sit down and run the Senate. But when the first golf course that was created in the United States, that's when they stopped doing it, right? They went golfing instead. No, I'm being kidding there. But that's what I think. Okay. The Senate is a very, very important role. At one time, they were appointed they were elected by state legislators. Why aren't they elected by state legislators anymore? What happened? I stumped you. An amendment was passed. Anybody know? It was the 17th Amendment, and that was passed right around World War I era, and that said now that they're elected by the people in the state. And people say, that's a good thing, right? Well, maybe yes, maybe no, because way back then, the senators were almost ambassadors to the federal government. And because they were answerable to the legislators and not to the people directly, and before the income tax was passed, they had to go back with a bill, say, hey, Gov, we got to raise this money because we just voted for all this cool stuff. Really? You're not going to get reelected. So they were a real check. It was a serious check and balance. And that changed during the so-called era of the progressive era. And everything was changed there. So senators are no longer elected by legislators. They're elected by the people. For how many years? 6 years. Now, they have some unique duties. Anybody know one of the things that they do that's unique? I need adults. I need campers, and I need a hand raise. Yes, sir. Stand up. They what? Well, Congress declares war, so it's the House and the Senate, but they ratify treaties. Now, I'm not a big math guy. Okay, I'm not a big math guy. I know we got some mathematical geniuses, but my 2 favorite fractions are 2/3 and 3/4. Right? Why is that? And I think it was a favorite fraction of the framers of the Constitution. Why is that? You can stand up. If you're stumped, that's okay.
Well, I know 2/3 is the number.
2/3 to ratify a treaty, which makes it difficult on purpose, right? 3/4 to pass 2/3 also to pass an amendment, right? And 3/4 of the states to approve of an amendment. They wanted the amendment process very, very difficult for a good reason. If it was an easy reason, if it was easy to pass an amendment, we would have lost our Constitution about 100 years ago. There's been hundreds of proposed amendments. So those are 2, and also something called the Electoral College. Now that term wasn't in the Constitution. It's a term that was adopted. Is that a good thing, the Electoral College? Should we abolish it? Because some people want to abolish it. Why? Can everybody give a short defense of the Electoral College? Yes, sir. Stand up.
Okay, it's because they want a populist vote.
That's right. The president was never supposed to be a popularity contest. When they were debating at the convention, by the way, I want to mention too, that the convention, prior to the adoption of the Constitution, what was the law of the land in the United States? Anybody know? Anybody, any campers? Yes, sir. The Articles of Confederation, right. And that was signed in 1781, and there were some problems with that. There was no executive, branch. The Congress could ask for stuff, but they had no way of getting it from the states. So that was put aside when we adopted the U.S. Constitution. That's right. All right. Now, which amendment reads, from each according to his abilities, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs? Which amendment? So it's not in the Constitution, right? You'd be surprised how many people who should know better. Now, some people say, that's a trick question. No, it's not, if you know the Constitution. Now, how many people have read this vile Communist Manifesto? Anybody read this? We've done classes on this in the past. We should probably do it again, but I want to talk about this a little bit. Dr. Duke Pester, who was here last year, he's a professor at a University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. He said that this is the most widely read book in colleges today, state colleges especially. And they don't read it to refute it. They read it to embrace it. And you should be familiar with it. This was in 1848 when I'll go into some background. He was basically commissioned by an organization called the League of the Just, or League of Just Men, or something like that, to write this. And he laid out 10 planks of the manifesto. And he basically said, if you adopt these 10 planks, you have yourselves a communist country. They were actually going to call this the Socialist Manifesto, but at the time there were some people running around Europe that were socialists, that were called socialists, and Marx didn't want anything to do with them. Marx was a very vile man, his own personal conduct. Prior to where he wrote about the 10 planks, he said that communism abolishes all eternal truths. That is the most anti-Christian thing that you could write, that it abolishes. I was at a Bible college speaking about, a number of years ago. I mean, we're talking about a real conservative Bible college. And one of the students said, communism in theory is a good thing. And it just came to me. I said, that's like telling me hell is okay, it just needs to be run by the right demons, you know? And I said, you really need to read it. He heard what we call the cliche. There's a lot of these cliches, you know. You can't fight City Hall, you know, these cliches, but you can fight City Hall when you have the right cause, all right? So one of the planks of the manifesto is a progressive income tax. That will never happen here, right? We have it, don't we? So if you looked at the manifesto, the 10 planks, many of the planks are partially or fully installed in our country, okay? So you need to you can go online and find it, and it's not that long, and I do have a few extra copies. Someone can take this if they're interested. The thing is, when they see a copy of this at our table, what, you guys are communist? No, we're trying to expose it, okay? There is an incredible book that I call the answer to the Communist Manifesto. It was called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. It was written in 1850. It was interesting. My daughter, Georgia, she was going to a private college, but it was secular, although it wasn't as hardcore left as you would find many of them. Her college professor gave her a term paper to do on capitalism and communism. I said, oh, great, this is good. You come to the right person for that one. And then I suggested that you give him a copy of the law. And we had numerous copies. So she eventually did. She was a little discreet about it. She gave it to him in his office. And I said, he's probably never heard about it, but he's going to love you for doing this. He's going to really appreciate the fact that you gave this to him. So she went to his office, and she said, oh, I'll look it over, you know, and he put it aside. Well, about a week later, he said, wow, that was quite a book. He became a disciple of Frederick Bastiat, just because someone dropped something off on someone's desk. Stuff that you can do. And even when you go off to college, wherever the college may be, you can help teach your teachers and teach your professors while you're teaching your students, your fellow students as well. Okay, lawmaking abilities are vested in which branch of government? Someone who hasn't, yes sir, stand up and be nice and loud. Congress, right? And where do we find that? Article 1, Section 1, that says all lawmaking abilities are vested in a Congress which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So, here's an algebra question. If all lawmaking abilities are vested in Congress, How many are vested in the executive or the judicial? 0. Then why do people say the Supreme Court is the highest law of the land? Another one of these things we hear a lot, but it's wrong. Yes, do you have a...
The Supreme Court is not like they haven't been the constitutional.
I can't hear a little louder.
They're meant to make rulings based on what they think is constitutional.
Right, they're supposed to judge the case. Now, does the Supreme Court have an army or a police department? Who enforces the Supreme Court decision? Who does? Someone has to, right? If they have a decision and they have no mechanism to enforce it, what good is it, right? I mean, if you got a traffic ticket on your, for $50 and no one ever said you had to pay it, you probably wouldn't pay it, right? But then you get another ticket for $100, and then they're going to take your license away and they're going to put a boot on your car, then you're probably going to pay it, right? Who is supposed to uphold the law? What branch of what of the 3 branches? Yes, sir. The executive branch, right? The Attorney General can just say, we're not going to go down to Kansas and arrest a woman who refused to give a license to 2 men that want to get married because their state said it's against the law. That's not but they didn't do that. Under Obama, they sent in federal marshals and arrested this woman, Kim Davis. If I was the sheriff of that county, I would have arrested the federal marshals and put them in a county jail and billed Obama I would have charged him a nice fee for the overnight there too. Okay, Supreme Court can be reined in. There's 2 things that can be done. One is impeachment. A justice can be impeached, and the second thing, and this is all in the Constitution, in Article 3. Congress can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. That means they can pass, and they can say, we're going to pass a law, and we're going to say right in this law that the Supreme Court has no standing. And they've done that in the past with labor laws. So you can pass a law that says to outlaw abortion, and then put in there and say the Supreme Court cannot rule on this. That's all they have to do. You don't have to add an amendment. So anyway, but that's because most people don't know the Constitution. Most congressmen don't know it. All right, now, how many amendments are there in the Constitution? Yes, ma'am. 27. What are the first amendments, the first 10 referred to? Again. The Bill of Rights. You know, we do parade floats in the town of Dedham, which is near Boston. The first year we were there, we passed out about 500 or 600 constitutions, and we asked that question to the people getting them. About 10% of them got it right. But the second and third years, it was more like 50-50. So I think we were having an impact there. The Bill of Rights. Now, did the Bill of Rights give us rights? Think about it. What did it really do? When you look at the Bill of Rights, what really did it do? Yes, sir. Well, yes, but it basically said what Congress can't do. Congress shall not, and as John McManus, you'd say the 9th and 10th Amendments, and we forgot anything, you can't do that either. And all the other powers that are not specifically mentioned are reserved to the states and to the people, right? Congress is not a blank check. They have limited powers. And on that the little bag that you handed, who has a little bag you want to show up? The bag you got. There's a picture of a guy. He's a very cool dude. His name is James Madison, and he was known as the father of the Constitution. Why is that? Why was he known as the father of the Constitution? Because during the convention, he took copious notes. He made and you can actually get those notes, and you can learn a lot. And James Madison knew a lot about the concept of separation. Oh, I want to cover that. Separation of church and state, right? That's a very interesting one. Now, historically, churches cooperated or collaborated with government. Why was that? It's always in the best interest of a civil government that the citizens are honest, that they are going to obey the law, that they're not going to steal, rob, murder. And where's a good place to learn those kinds of traits to make you a good citizen? In a church, right? So even today, in many cities and towns, when you vote, you'll vote in a church. Interesting. Years ago, the ballrooms and taverns were always closed on election day, and there was always an election sermon, and they would publish these in the daily papers. What does Pastor Jones think about? And the goal of the clergyman isn't to endorse candidates, but it's to say these are the types of people you should be looking for to elect. In fact, the Massachusetts Constitution says that morality, frugality, and piety are traits that you should look for in an elected official. Instead of what are they going to promise you, what are they going to give you? What kind of stuff are they going to give you? Okay. So the separation of church and state, is that in the first, who has, someone read the First Amendment, nice and loud, stand up. You want to turn the camera on too. Who wants to read it? Who's got a good booming voice? Oh, come on.
Come on, guys.
Come on. Pull out your Constitution, First Amendment.
Jesse.
Okay, I got one.
Okay, stand up.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people, peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Okay, so Congress cannot establish a church or deny the free exercise or religion. And we don't want a state or federal church, but it's interesting when that amendment was passed, did we have any state churches at the state level? Not the federal level, but state level? We certainly did. Massachusetts was a congregational church. I know Connecticut was also congregational. So a state church means that you're taxed, you got to pay your tax money to support that church, even if you don't belong to it. And these states eventually did away with the concept of state church, but it took a while. I think it was the late 1820s when Massachusetts changed that. Was there an ACLU in those days? Nope. They just realized, they said, you know what? We can do this under the Constitution. It's not forbidding us, but it's probably not a good idea. And so they changed that. So, in fact, there's a man named Fisher Ames. He was one of the first members of Congress, and he's the primary author of the First Amendment. Now, he lived in the town of Dedham, that's next door to me, and in his papers, one of his statements was that the Bible should be the major, I'm paraphrasing, it's not a direct quote, the Bible should be the major book in all schools. Well, wait a minute now. Didn't he know this First Amendment was the separation of church and state? The author of that amendment said the Bible should be the major book. And so when people say separation of church and state, say, read the First Amendment for me and tell me if it says it in there. What happened, that was a letter sent by the Danbury, Connecticut Baptists to Thomas Jefferson. They were concerned that they would establish a federal church, and he wrote back, and he used the term separation of church and state. He said it was like a one-way wall. He didn't say that we don't want people with Christian values in government, that you can't pray at a football game, or you can't pray over milk and cookies in your kindergarten class. That wasn't what that was about, okay? So people take things out of context. Sometimes people, they see something and they want the concept of itching ears. Let's just change the meaning, because this is the meaning we want, the meaning that fits, okay? All right, which branch of government has the power to regulate education? Right in the Constitution, right? Yes, sir. None of the federal government. Now, most people think the federal government, who take this quiz, think the federal government has some control over education. And there was a book published in 1941. It was called The Formation of the Union Under the Constitution. It was published by the U.S. government printing office to celebrate I think it was the 150th anniversary of the Constitution. Now, who was president in 1941? An adult can help. If adult was it mine? Do you know? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? Was he a staunch constitutionalist? He was not. He was basically a socialist, a New Dealer. Who controlled Congress in 1941? Ron Paul Republicans, right? No, you had the same New Deal Congress. So they're the ones that published this. And in the middle of this book, and there's some great stuff in there, I picked it up at a library book sale for about $1, right? A lot of libraries get rid of their good books. And libraries will have this library, they have this banned book month that libraries have. Libraries are always banning books. And they don't burn them, but they throw them away so they can be burned, right? So anyway, in this book, it had that same question. What role does the federal government have in education? So it's a New Deal, liberal, socialist administration, and guess what they answered? Your same answer, none. So what has happened since 1941? Has there been a new amendment in there? So why does the federal government have a lot of control of education? Why did they say to the states back in, I think, 09 or 10, we want you to adopt Common Core, and we'll give you gobs of money. Take it sight unseen. You can do anything you want with the money. Why do we have a Department of Education? It should be abolished, right? No, I have, someone asked me about the woman in charge now, Betsy DeVos. They asked me about her. I said, she's no doubt better than anyone that Hillary Clinton would have appointed. I said, but if she was a true constitutionalist, she would auction off all of the property that's owned by that entity and then to the highest bidder and then resign. That's what a true constitutionalist would do. It's unconstitutional. And just look at how we've declined since the government, now it was, became a cabinet position during the Jimmy Carter administration in the 70s. And the SAT scores are going down, down, and down, even when they dumb them down. So federal involvement in education is a disaster, okay, and it's unconstitutional. How are we doing for time?
9:34.
Okay, good. All right, we're almost done here. Okay, where in the Constitution is foreign aid mentioned? Give me an amendment, give me an article. Nowhere. So then why do we send billions of dollars all over the world all the time to countries, in some cases, that hate us, and some countries who are indifferent to us? We've been doing it, I don't know, since the 1930s, maybe before. Billions of dollars. It's unconstitutional. If you want to send a check to your favorite country, there was a gentleman that I knew, he had passed away, and in his will, he was a man of the Jewish faith. He left some money to the nation of Israel. Well, that was his prerogative. He wanted to give it to the government of Israel. That's fine. Would you want to give your money to the federal government? I don't think so. And by the way, when it comes to savings bonds, you know, I remember when I worked in the post office years ago, they had these bond drives. They wanted us to all sign up. It made the supervisors look good. I said I would rather give money to a drunk, because a drunk would only, hurt himself a little bit. But when you give the federal government more money, what do they do with it? They spend it. And then when you spend it, they say, we need more now. So I don't recommend savings bonds, by the way. Okay. How many senators are needed to ratify a treaty? I already covered that, right? How many senators are ratified? You can give me a fraction. You don't have to give me a number. Yes, sir. 2/3. Now, 2/3 of those present, and there's 100, right? And they can pass a treaty without 100. They can need a quorum, I think, of 51. So you can pass a treaty with, 37 or 38. But this is something about treaties. They're not passing treaties anymore. What are they doing? They're passing agreements. Obama had the Paris Accords. Congress didn't even sign this. And Trump did the right thing. I remember I got your message. You were so excited when Trump pulled out, and a lot of people were. Obama said we're going to shut down our coal industry. We're going to do away with our CO2s. And by the way, then we're going to give billions of dollars to India and China and these other countries so they can do likewise. And Trump and some people, yes, ma'am.
But we're not out.
We're not out. We're not out yet. Okay.
We should be talking about, sorry to interrupt, because it's a perfect opportunity to say we need to get Trump elected in 2020 so that we are out. Because if we get a Democrat or somebody who believes in the Paris Agreement,
They'll keep us in.
on the November 4th, 2020, we're back in unless Trump or somebody else says, no, we're going to remain out.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
One thing that he could and should do now, if he were this month to give notice under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, 1 year's notice of quitting that convention, then after 1 year from now, that takes you out of the convention and out of the Paris Agreement.
We should be pushing that right now.
Okay, well, we'll do that. All right, which branch of Congress initiates the impeachment process? It's a 50-50 chance of getting this one right. Yes, sir. House of Representatives. Now, follow-up question. Who was the last president, who were the 2 presidents impeached? There were only 2. Yes, sir.
Wasn't it Bill Clinton?
Bill Clinton?
Yes?
Andrew Johnson. He was the man who took over after Lincoln was assassinated. Now, impeachment doesn't mean he's kicked out of office. Impeachment is like an indictment. There's enough evidence to bring it forward. And who tries the impeachment case? The ACLU? No. The Senate. And it's in your Constitution under Article 2. The Senate acts like a jury, and you need 2/3 to remove, and the Supreme Court justice presides over it, okay? So the 2 presidents that were impeached were not found guilty, and if they are found guilty of the charges, they can only be removed from office. They may be liable to other, federal laws, but when it comes to impeachment, they can't put them in jail. They can only remove them, impeachment. Okay. And of course, there's a lot of talk about impeaching Trump by the Democrats, just because they don't like his hairstyle, or they don't like his tweets. That's not a reason for impeachment.
Well, he should be impeached for his hairstyle.
Okay, this is a very important question, because how many of you plan to go into the military? A few of you, okay? Which branch of government declares war? Who hasn't answered? Yes, sir. Mr. Kalis. Congress. Follow-up question. When was the last time Congress declared war? Yes, sir. World War II. So right after Pearl Harbor, December 8th, December 9th. So wait a minute now. We've been in Korea, Vietnam, 2 Gulf Wars. Why is that? You know why? Because we have police. Most people will say, well, that was a police action. What is a police action? When you call 911 and say someone's breaking into the house, or there's an assault on the street or something, that's a police action. Sending millions of soldiers to fight foreign armies is not a police action. But you see, because in 1945, as Mr. McManus pointed out, he'll probably talk about the UN talk, right? They passed the UN Participation Act. And basically said when the UN Security Council wants to send our soldiers somewhere, they will send them. Do we vote for the Security Council? No. We have 1 vote, and that person's appointed by the president. And I think there's, 5 permanent nations and 3 or 4 nations that every so year they have new ones. And some of these nations are hostile, very hostile to us. They're the ones that control our soldiers, unfortunately. And that's why we don't win wars anymore. We're still in Korea. We could have won that war. We actually did win the war, but it wasn't supposed to be won. And we're still there. We're still paying for it. And the 2 Gulf Wars, I remember young Mr. George W. Bush, Daddy Bush, he gave a speech and he said, I want congressional approval, but I'm appealing to a higher authority. Was that God he was appealing to? What higher authority was he referring to? The UN. Is the UN in our chain of command here in the Constitution? We are a sovereign nation. We don't answer to the UN. But when we sign treaties that are unconstitutional and people think they're enforceable, we're stuck with them. So that's why we have to get out of the UN. And when I say that, I should hear an applause. Yeah. All right. And Mr. McManus will get, just like we need to get out of, you guys need to get out of Brexit, right? Get out of the European Union.
We're working on it.
That's right. Okay. Okay, are there any questions?
3.5 years.
Okay. All right, well, I think that's That's all I have, so I can give the extra few minutes. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next class.